My name is Vivian Achebe. I'm 38 years old. 6 months ago, on a Saturday afternoon in March, I walked into my parents' living room to find 11 members of my family arranged in a semicircle of dining chairs that my mother had clearly repositioned from the kitchen table. My father stood near the fireplace with a printed spreadsheet in his hand. My mother sat in her usual chair with the expression she reserved for conversations she had decided mattered. My brother Kofi was there, and my Aunt Berenice, and 3 cousins, and my father's oldest friend, a man named Pastor Williams who had known me since I was 4 years old and who had apparently been invited to provide moral weight to the proceedings. I had come over because my mother said she was making fufu. There was no fufu. "Vivian," my father said, "we love you. And because we love you, we need to talk about what you've been doing with your money." My father held up the spreadsheet. He had built it himself. I recognized his formatting, the color-coded columns, the footer with today's date. It listed, as best as he had been able to reconstruct from things I had mentioned over the previous 2 years, what he believed to be evidence of reckless financial behavior. A renovation I had mentioned, travel I had described, a figure he had somehow extrapolated as a down payment on something he called speculative. His total came to approximately $340,000 of what he characterized, at the top of the page in a cell he had formatted in red, as irresponsible expenditure. 11 people looked at me. My father said, "We're worried you're going to lose everything." What none of them knew, what I had not told a single person in that room, not because I was hiding it, but because I had been waiting for a specific call that came through on my phone at 8:47 that morning, 3 hours before I arrived at my parents' house, was that 2 days earlier I had signed the final documents on a transaction that had been 14 months in the making. The renovation they thought was reckless was a commercial property I had been rehabilitating for resale. The travel was site visits to 3 additional acquisitions. The speculative down payment was the first installment on a portfolio that, as of 8:47 that morning, had been appraised at a combined value of $2.3 million. I had a confirmation number. I had signed documents in a folder in my bag. I had a certified letter from my attorney sitting in my car. I had come for fufu. Before I tell you what happened in that living room, please like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy this story. Drop a comment. Where are you watching from and what time is it there? I love connecting with you all. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. Growing up in Silver Spring, Maryland, I understood that in our house money was sacred in a particular way. Not worshipped exactly, but treated with the reverence of people who had learned its absence firsthand and did not intend to relearn that lesson. My family. Dad, Emmanuel, civil engineer, a man who had emigrated from Accra at 23, with credentials that took 3 years to be recognized in America, and who had metabolized that experience into an almost theological commitment to stability. Mom, Grace, registered nurse, practical and warm, whose love expressed itself in food and preparation, and a low tolerance for what she called putting yourself at risk. My brother Kofi, 4 years older, accountant, a man who had followed the approved financial path so faithfully that our father sometimes cited him in conversation as an example of correct behavior, the way a professor cites a textbook. And me, Vivian, the one who had gone into real estate consulting at 24, shifted into acquisition work at 28, and spent the subsequent decade building something my family found genuinely difficult to categorize because it did not fit the template of approved success. The template was stable employer, predictable salary, pension if possible, no years where the income varied because varying income meant something had gone wrong. I had a lot of years where the income varied. When I was 26, I used $22,000 in savings, 4 years of deliberate accumulation, to purchase a small row house in a Baltimore neighborhood that everyone in my family, without exception, described as a mistake. My father drove out to see it on a Sunday and stood on the sidewalk in front of it and said, "Vivian, you bought this." He said it the way you say something when what you mean is the opposite. The house needed work. I did much of it myself on weekends for 7 months. I learned things from YouTube tutorials and a retired contractor named Sal, who lived 2 streets over and who, in exchange for me cooking him dinner twice a month, taught me more about structural assessment than I had learned in 2 years of coursework. I sold the house 14 months after purchase for $67,000 more than I paid. After costs, I netted $41,000. I told my parents. My father nodded carefully, the nod of a man acknowledging a result while reserving judgment about the method. My mother said, "That's wonderful, honey, but what if it had gone the other way?" I told myself that was fair, that they were worried, that the result would eventually accumulate into evidence they could trust. At 29, I bought 2 properties simultaneously in a mid-sized city in Virginia, where I had identified a development corridor that 3 separate planning documents suggested was about to become significantly more valuable. The simultaneous purchase required a financial structure my parents found alarming, bridge financing, which my father described as the kind of thing people do right before they lose everything. Both properties sold within 18 months. Combined net after costs, $118,000. My father reviewed the numbers carefully when I showed him. He said, "You were fortunate." I was 29. I had spent 11 months doing structural assessments, zoning research, contractor negotiations, and market analysis on 2 properties in a city where I knew no one. Fortune was not the primary variable. I told myself he would understand when the pattern continued. The most severe moment came at 34. I had been working for 14 months on the largest acquisition I had attempted, a mixed-use commercial building in a neighborhood in Washington, D.C., undergoing what I had assessed as genuine, infrastructure-backed revitalization rather than speculative pressure. The deal required everything I had, plus a commercial loan, and a private equity partner I had spent 6 months finding, a woman named Harriet Cross, who ran a small but serious real estate investment firm, and who had reviewed my track record and said, "You're more disciplined than half the developers I've backed at twice your experience level." I was 4 weeks from closing when my parents hosted a family birthday dinner, and my father, in front of 9 people, said to Kofi, not to me, to Kofi, "Your sister is about to put everything on one number. I hope she knows what she's doing." He said it quietly, not cruelly, with the genuine worry of a man who had built security from scratch and watched his daughter repeatedly choose the opposite of what he understood security to mean. I heard it. Everyone heard it. I said, "I know exactly what I'm doing, Dad." He looked at me with patient love and unconcealed doubt. I told myself the closing would speak for itself. The DC building sold 14 months after acquisition for $890,000. My share, after the equity split and costs, was $310,000. I did not call home to announce the number. I had learned, by 34, that each result was received as an isolated event rather than a pattern. Fortunate, well-timed, a risk that happened to work out. The framework never updated. The worry reconstituted itself around the next thing I was doing, the same worry in a new configuration, requiring the same explanation I had already given, being heard with the same fundamental doubt. And so I stopped explaining forward. I let them have the version they had. I went quiet about the work, and I built, and I waited for the day when the accumulated truth would be too large to be received as fortune. I had been waiting for that day for 4 years. But all of that was just preparation for what came next. I need to tell you about Harriet Cross before I tell you about the 14 months that preceded that Saturday. Harriet had backed the DC deal and 2 subsequent acquisitions after it. She was 61, the daughter of a contractor, a woman who had built her firm from 4 properties and a borrowed $50,000 at 32, and had spent 3 decades developing the specific skill of identifying operators whose judgment she could trust. She was direct in a way that initially surprised me. She said exactly what she thought, a quality I had not encountered often in professional settings, and which I found after the first adjustment period to be the most useful working relationship I had ever had. She had been watching me for 3 years when she made the offer. We were having dinner after a closing in the fall of 2 years ago, and she set down her fork and said, "I want to talk to you about something larger." She had been quietly assembling an opportunity, a portfolio of 6 adjacent commercial properties in a mid-Atlantic city that had been held by an estate in probate for 4 years, mismanaged by an out-of-state executor, and which had just cleared legal review for sale. The portfolio needed an operator who understood rehabilitation at scale, who could manage multiple contractor relationships simultaneously, who knew how to read a city's infrastructure investment patterns, and who had the temperament to hold through the 18 to 24 months it would take to execute the strategy correctly. "I've been doing this for 30 years, Harriet said. "I know about 5 people I'd trust with this. You're one of them." The portfolio purchase price was $1.4 million. Harriet would provide 70% of the capital. I would provide 30%, $420,000, which was nearly everything I had in liquid assets, and take the lead operator role, with a structured equity agreement that gave me 38% of the net proceeds on exit. I spent 6 weeks on due diligence before I said yes. I hired 2 independent assessors. I pulled every permit, every violation, every planning document for the surrounding 8 blocks. I built the financial model 14 different ways and tested it against 3 stress scenarios, including one in which the exit took 30 months instead of 24, and one in which rehabilitation costs ran 20% over budget. In every scenario, the deal worked. I said yes. The 14 months that followed were the most demanding of my professional life, and also, in a way I recognized only from the inside, the most completely myself I had ever been at work. I managed 4 contractors across 6 properties simultaneously. I negotiated with 3 commercial tenants about lease restructuring. I navigated 2 permit delays and 1 contractor replacement, and a 6-week period in which the cash flow model was stretched thin enough that I woke at 4 a.m. twice and ran the numbers again just to confirm they still held. They held. By month 11, 4 of the 6 properties were fully rehabilitated and under letter of intent with buyers. By month 13, all 6 were under contract. By month 14, we were at closing. The portfolio sold for $3.1 million. My 38% of the net proceeds, after the return of capital and the cost basis, was $627,000. The certified letter from the title company confirming the final wire transfer had arrived on the Thursday before my mother called to invite me for fufu. I had been sitting with the number for 48 hours when my father stood in the living room with his red-fonted spreadsheet. My father's living room in Silver Spring is the living room of a man who built stability from nothing and decorated accordingly. Solid furniture, a bookshelf with both engineering textbooks and Ghanaian literature, a framed photograph of the house in Accra he grew up in, which he had told me about enough times that I could describe it without seeing it. 11 people in the semicircle of repositioned chairs. I stood in the doorway with my bag on my shoulder and looked at them. I want to tell you honestly what I felt in that moment, because it wasn't what you might expect. It wasn't triumph or vindication. It was something more complicated. Something that recognized the love in the room, even as it recognized the damage. My father had printed a spreadsheet. He had called 11 people. He had invited Pastor Williams. He had done all of this because he was genuinely afraid his daughter was going to lose everything, and because that fear was built on 30 years of watching hard-won security disappear and not wanting to watch it happen again. The fear was real. The love behind it was real. The spreadsheet was also deeply wrong. I came in. I sat down. I let my father deliver the opening. I let him explain the concern. I let Pastor Williams offer a gentle scripture about prudence and stewardship, which was Psalm 112, and which I actually agreed with on its face. I let my Aunt Berenice say she had seen too many people her age lose their retirement to schemes that sounded good on paper. I let my brother Kofi, who I knew had been drafted into this and who kept giving me a look that said I had no choice, they organized this before I could stop it, nod in a way that was clearly trying to be supportive of me, while technically appearing supportive of the intervention. I let the room say what it had assembled to say. Then I reached into my bag. I had 3 documents. I set them on the coffee table. The first was the signed purchase agreement from 14 months ago, the $1.4 million portfolio acquisition, with my name on the operator line and the equity terms clearly spelled out. The second was the rehabilitation summary, which Harriet's firm prepared for every project. Properties addressed, costs incurred, timelines met, contractor sign-offs, permit completions. 41 pages. I fanned it onto the table without saying anything. The third was the certified letter from the title company, 2 pages. The final sale price of $3.1 million at the top, the distribution breakdown below, my name, the wire amount. I tapped the third document. "This is what the reckless spending was," I said. This is what I've been building for the last 14 months. My father picked up the letter. He read the first page. He turned to the second page. He read the distribution line. He set it down. He picked it up. He read it again. My mother said, "Emmanuel." He didn't answer. Pastor Williams leaned forward from his chair and looked at the document my father was holding and made a sound that was not language. My brother Kofi, after a moment, said quietly, "Vivian." Just my name. The way you say someone's name when words are insufficient for what you mean. My Aunt Berenice pressed her hands together. My father set the letter down on the coffee table very carefully, the way you set something down when you're not sure what to do next and you need a moment to find out. "The renovation you were worried about," I said, "was property 3 in the portfolio. The travel was site visits. The down payment you flagged as speculative was my 30% buy-in, which Harriet Cross, my partner who has been in this industry for 30 years, reviewed my full track record before agreeing to structure." I looked around the room. "I have been doing this for 12 years, I said. "The Baltimore row house, the Virginia acquisitions, the DC building. Every time I showed you a result, it was received as luck. Every time I showed you the next project, it was received as risk that hadn't failed yet. I stopped telling you what I was working on because the telling cost more than the work." My voice was even. I had not raised it. I was not going to raise it. "I'm not reckless," I said. "I'm the most disciplined person in this family about money. I just discipline it differently than Dad did. Both things can be true." My father was quiet for a long time. The room was quiet with him. Then he said, "6 properties." "6 properties," I said. "In 14 months." "In 14 months." He looked at the rehabilitation summary. 41 pages. He didn't read it. He just looked at the weight of it. "I owe you an apology," he said. He said it to the room, which meant he said it to me. My father was not a man who found direct apology easy. I knew this. I received what he offered. "The fortune comment," I said. "At 26, at 29, at 34. He nodded. "Yes." "I need you to understand that it was never fortune," I said. "It was work. It was years of specific, careful, disciplined work. And I need you to know that. Not for me, not anymore, but because I want to have a real conversation with you about what I'm building. Not a defense, a conversation." My father looked at me for a moment. He said, "I would like that." Not "I'm so proud" or "I understand now" or any of the large statements the moment might have invited. Just, "I would like that." It was enough. It was honest. It was the beginning of something that required time to become what it could be, and I was willing to give it the time. Pastor Williams, recovering himself, said, "I believe I came here to pray for financial prudence, and I find I should perhaps update my definition of the term." The room laughed. The tension broke the way it needs to. Not disappeared, but redistributed into something bearable. My mother went to the kitchen. 20 minutes later, there was fufu. The months since have been the careful work of 2 people learning to speak a language they should have been speaking for years. My father called me the following week and asked me to explain the equity structure of the Harriet partnership from the beginning. He listened for an hour. He asked 7 questions. 3 of them were good questions, the kind that told me he was actually engaging with the model rather than looking for confirmation of existing worry. At the end, he said, "Your risk management is more conservative than I understood." "It always was," I said. "I know," he said. "I should have asked sooner." Harriet, when I told her the story, laughed for a full 30 seconds. Then she said, "Your father built a spreadsheet." She said it with genuine warmth. "Emmanuel sounds like someone who understands that the numbers matter. He just didn't have the right numbers." She offered to have a call with him. I passed along the offer. My father accepted it, which surprised me and also didn't. He spent 45 minutes on the phone with Harriet Cross, a woman who had 30 years and a $40 million portfolio, and by the end they were discussing commercial zoning regulations in the Mid-Atlantic corridor as though they had known each other for years. My father called me afterward and said, "She's very serious." "Yes," I said. "She thinks very highly of you." "I know." A pause. I should have been paying closer attention. You were paying attention, I said. You just didn't have all the information. We are building the habit of the real conversation. It is slow and sometimes awkward, and occasionally my father will say something that requires me to take a breath before I respond. And occasionally I will say something that requires him to take a breath before he responds. We are learning each other at a depth we avoided for a long time, out of mutual protection that turned out to cost more than the exposure would have. Kofi apologized for the intervention by making me dinner and refusing to discuss it directly, which is entirely on brand and which I accepted without requiring more. I am currently 14 months into the next project. I have not told my father the details yet, not because I'm protecting it, but because we are still building the trust that allows that conversation to be generative rather than defensive. When it's ready, I'll bring it to the table. This time, he'll have the framework to receive it. If you're watching this and someone in your family has been confusing discipline with recklessness, caution with limitation, a different path with a wrong one, I want to say this. Their fear is not evidence of your error. It is evidence of their experience. Those are not the same thing. You can love someone and know they are wrong about you. You can understand where their doubt comes from and still refuse to internalize it. You can be patient with their inability to see you clearly while continuing to build the thing they can't yet see. The work is the answer. Not the announcement, not the argument, not the intervention where you explain yourself until they believe you. The work. The 41-page rehabilitation summary. The certified letter from the title company. The 30 years of Harriet Cross looking at your track record and saying, I know about 5 people I'd trust with this. Build it until it's undeniable. And when someone repositions the dining chairs and invites the pastor and prints the spreadsheet, let them finish. Let them love you in the imperfect and frightened way they know how to. Then reach into your bag. Thank you for staying with me until the end. If this resonated, please like and subscribe. Here's what I want to ask you. Has someone who loved you ever confused their fear for your limitation? And how did you learn to hold both the love and the wrongness at the same time? Drop your answer in the comments below. I read every one. Until next time, build it until it's undeniable. The work is the answer.